Hey gang, it's Squill, and one of the biggest focuses in Season 1 of Fiona and Cake was the Ice Crown. Predating the Lich's Catalyst Comet, the crown is probably the oldest item in the series' history. The Ice Crown was initially created as a wishing crown by the first ever ice elemental, Urgent's Evergreen, and it was created in an attempt to wish away the Lich's Catalyst Comet. This backfired, however, when Evergreen's apprentice Gunther put on the crown instead, who instead wished to become his master Evergreen. But how exactly does the crown affect people? And what does the crown's influence upon a user say about that individual? This is a topic I've been interested in ever since the release of Fiona and Cake Season 1, and I'd like to do so by comparing the two characters who we've seen under the influence of the crown the most, those being Simon Petrov and Farmworld Finn. Of course, there are other characters we've seen wear the crown before, whom I'll briefly touch upon. However, this video will mainly focus on Farmworld Finn and Simon, as these are the two characters whom I have the most to say about. Let's begin by discussing everyone's favorite mentally ill old man, Simon Petrov. Right off the bat, I think one of the most notable aspects of Simon's transformation that a lot of people seem to forget is just how gradual it was. Yes, eventually he would go full-blown Ice King. However, the process to get him there took many years, compared to Finn, who transformed almost immediately. I think this really speaks to Simon's sheer willpower, that he was able to fight off the crown for this long. I'm sure a lot of Simon's mental strength here comes with his scientific mind and his already strong knowledge on magical artifacts. However, it's also important to acknowledge that his goals, those being to protect Marceline and get Betty back, likely also contributed to his ability to keep at least some of his sanity intact. Marcy especially really helped keep Simon grounded during this time in his life. He arguably needed her more than she needed him. Whenever Simon would get too carried away with the crown, Marcy would be there to pull him back. I don't think it's a coincidence that Simon didn't go full Ice King mode until after he left Marceline. And I'm sure to some degree the thought of getting Betty back helped keep Simon's sanity at least for a little bit. The thought that one day they'll be able to meet again and things will go back to normal. Unfortunately, however, Simon's relationships could only ground him so much, as he just couldn't resist using the power of the crown. Over the years, I've seen a lot of people compare Simon's struggle with the crown to that of an elderly person with Alzheimer's, and while that interpretation is definitely valid, I've always seen it as closer to alcoholism. Something that gives him an extra boost of confidence, but also makes him more off-putting to others. He was addicted to not only the power of the crown, but the self-sacrificing nature of him wearing it. His desire to protect others even at the cost of his own sanity, and despite the fact that he ends up hurting people in the process. And Simon's desires will end up informing his goals later on in his life as the Ice King. The obvious one is his obsession with princesses. This can be traced back to his desire to get Betty back, whom he often referred to as his princess. But if we want to take this even further, we can look at his fixation on PB specifically. Much like Betty, PB is also a nerdy woman of science. It's entirely possible that, as Ice King, Simon is projecting his love of Betty onto PB. Hence why Ice King loves Bonnibel specifically above any other princess. But in addition to that, you can also see a bit of Simon come out in the ways in which Ice King will treat Gunther. Granted, it's not like Ice King treats Gunther perfectly. He's definitely prone to a bit of abusive behavior. But let's just compare him to Evergreen for a second. While Ice King may have occasionally shown abusive behavior, Evergreen was consistently abusive towards Gunther. He neglected Gunther's safety, he verbally reprimanded him, and even physically abuses him. And he only shows a little bit of self-reflection the moment before he's about to die. Now compare that to Ice King, who does on occasion yell at his penguins, but he never puts them in any physical harm. He treats them with far more care and compassion than Evergreen did for Gunther. I mean, look at an episode like King's Ransom. Ice King goes out of his way to put himself in physical danger in this one. And all just to get Gunther back. And on top of that, Ice King is clearly distraught the whole episode at the thought of Gunther being penguin-napped. Ice King clearly cares for the little guy far more than Evergreen cared for Gunther, and I think the ways in which Simon cared for Marceline attributed to this. I think it's also worth noting the way Ice King treats Neptr in What Is Life. Throughout the second half of the episode, the Ice King tries to convince Neptr into helping him kidnap princesses. But at the end of the episode, it's revealed that Ice King genuinely viewed Neptr as a son and wanted his companionship. Funnily enough, he probably would have treated Neptr better than Finn and Jake did. Granted, by the next and final time the two interact, Ice King has forgotten about Neptr entirely, but my point largely stands. But there are also a couple other ways in which Simon's personality comes out in Ice King. For example, let's take a look at Ice King's wacky goofball personality. You may think this portrayal is contradictory to someone as intellectual as Simon, but this can actually be traced back to the ways in which Simon would try to cheer up Marceline during the post-Mushroom War era. This was obviously a dark time in both Simon and Marceline's lives, so naturally Simon would try his best to lighten the mood, until eventually Simon's goofiness took over his entire personality. Although it should also be noted that even before meeting Marcy and putting on the crown, Simon still had his goofy moments. Heck, even the fact that he plays the drums, as well as his general love of music, stems from the fact that Simon would often use music to help cheer Marcy up. I sort of see Ice King as a heightened version of Simon. A version of Simon where almost all of his personality traits were taken to an extreme. And this idea is expanded upon in Season 1 of Fiona and Cake, in which Simon almost misses being Ice King. And not just because he's the only normal human amongst a world of magical beings, but because he could protect Marceline while at the same time distracting himself from depressing thoughts with his goofy persona. Much like how Simon once put on the crown to protect Marceline, now he attempts to put it on out of hopes that he can protect Fiona and Cake. Simon, as a character, is fueled by his desire to protect others, even if he hurts himself in the process. His self-sacrificing nature is admirable, but can also be very dangerous to both himself and others. That's where I'm gonna end the Simon talk for now, although trust me, I could keep going, and instead let's switch gears to Farmworld Finn. Unlike Simon, and unlike the Finn we're all familiar with, there's nothing all too special about Farmworld Finn, at least when we first meet him. He doesn't live in a magical world, nor does he have any knowledge of magical artifacts. However, one similarity this version of Finn does have with Simon is his need to protect people. In this case, his family and their mule Bartram. In fact, when he initially finds the crown, he attempts to use it to pay off the destiny gain and keep Bartram. He only puts it on once his family is in danger. And unlike Simon, who was able to fight off his transformation, Finn transforms almost immediately. Likely due to the fact that he's much younger than Simon and has a lot less knowledge on magical artifacts. He shows much less control and restraint than Simon, immediately freezing people the moment he puts on the crown. It should be noted that even as Ice King, Simon was always relatively in control of his powers. Finn and Jake never saw him as anything more than a mild nuisance, compared to Farmworld Finn, who was just complete chaos. However, even through his insanity, Finn still shows desire to protect his family. As the moment his little brother starts crying, Finn snaps back to reality, at which he realizes how dangerous he is and sends his family away. The next time we see this version of Finn, he has gone full ice mode. He has taken better control of his ice powers to freeze all of the humans and take them to the New World. This is clearly an expansion on Finn's desire to protect his family, extending to humans in general and not just his parents and brother. Granted, this was all a plan by the Lich, so it was never going to actually work, but still. Our Finn even reminds his Farmworld counterpart that helping people is his whole thing, which seemingly helps snap him out. I find it interesting that the first thing Farmworld Finn does when the crown is removed is hug his family. Through the madness of the crown, they were the people he was doing this for the entire time. Both our Finn and Farmworld Finn have a strong desire to protect others and be a hero. And the same can still be said when we see Farmworld Finn as an adult, who is traumatized by his experience with the crown and wants to keep his family away from any and all forms of magic. Basically the exact opposite response that Simon had. This makes sense as not only did Finn have less control over himself than Simon did, but the Finn that we know is prone to repressing his traumatic memories. He'd much rather not think about his issues than actually confront them. This, combined with Finn's desire to protect his family, resulted in a resentment towards all things magic. This is somewhat off topic, but speaking of family, I do actually headcanon that Jay here is not Finn's son. Instead, I believe he is actually Finn's brother, which I think makes sense given the timeline. If Jay is about 12 or 13, he would have had to have been born right after the events of Crossover, which doesn't really make sense, unless of course he's Finn's brother and had already been born. Maybe their parents died not too long after Crossover, and to spare Jay's emotions along with repressing his own negative feelings, Finn told him that he was his father. While both Finn and Simon express the desire to protect people, Finn does not have the mental strength to handle the crown like Simon does. But what does this all say about the crown itself? Over the years, I've seen a lot of people boil the crown down to something as simple as an item that makes the person who wears it go insane. But I don't really think this is true. I mean, if you look at the Vampire King, he was barely affected by the crown at all. And once again, Simon's transformation into Ice King was far more gradual than Finn's transformation. Clearly, insanity is more of a side effect that depends on the person. No, instead I want to remind you all of the original purpose of the crown, to grant the deepest, truest wish of the first person who wears it. Of course, Gunther ended up wearing it, turning him into Evergreen, but I don't really think the crown completely stopped functioning like this. It's just that, instead of flat out granting the user's truest wish, it ends up heightening their true desires. Simon, or Ice King, kidnapped princesses, namely PB, out of desire to get his princess, Betty, back. He cares so much for his penguins out of his desire to protect others, namely Marceline. Farmworld Finn put the crown on in the first place so he could protect his family, and later uses it to send the humans to what he thinks is a better world. Heck, even the Vampire King uses the crown out of his desire for the vampires to thrive. The crown heightens the desires of the person who wears it, warping their minds into said desires being the only thing they think about. The severity and speed at which the mind is warped depends on the wearer, but the effect is there regardless. I do wonder, however, if this is an effect of the crown itself, or a result of Gunther's wish to become Evergreen, considering that Gunther likely saw Evergreen as someone so focused on creating the crown and wishing away the comet. And this character trait was passed down to everyone else who wears the crown. But that's about all I got for this one. Please let me know your thoughts on the crown and the way it affects people in the comments, and have a good one. Squill out.